Welcome to the ReUp Men's Podcast with Tim Brown. I'm Brandon Porter. ReUp is here to help you be the man God has created you to be. Tim is with me, and Tim, we're going to talk about marriage today. That's something that we have both experienced for quite a while. How long have you guys been married?
Well, we just celebrated our 40th anniversary back in January, and then we
Mm-hmm.
dated almost 4 years prior to that. So
Yeah.
been married 40 years, been together 44 years. I tell everybody I started dating Melinda when she was 14, which she was.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of raised her and kind of got her just the way I want her.
Yeah.
So it's worked out really well. So
Yeah. I
yeah.
hear you. Well, yeah. So we're coming up. We're just a week or so away from our 28th anniversary.
All right. Awesome.
And we dated for 6 years before that through high school and college years.
Well, you and I
So,
both kind of raised our wives and got them just the way we want them, and where
yeah,
they do exactly what we want when we want and all that.
I was gonna say Monica would probably say the opposite
Well,
in our
Melinda
case.
always does. She's like, "No, no, 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 no. I think it's the other way around." And I'm like,
Yep,
"I could probably agree with that." So,
yep, yep,
yeah, but yeah,
absolutely.
got married at the ripe age of 19 and 18.
Mhm, mhm. There you go. Well, I was thinking about this topic and remembering back to a time when I was pastoring a church. And a fella came in and had been going through a really difficult time in his marriage. And I felt like he had been looking for the counselor to give who would give him permission, would give him what he wanted to hear. And he finally got it. And it was almost a permission to pursue a divorce because he found a counselor who was a Christian counselor, he said. And this person told him that God wants you to be happy, and that if you're not happy in your marriage, then there is a path, there is an avenue right there. And we talked some that day about how while God does call us to be joyful, our joy matters to him, that he is potentially more concerned with our holiness than with our happiness in the grand scheme of life as we walk through the daily grind and the lessons of life.
Yeah.
And so I think about that in marriage. And I just wonder, as you think about that, as you think about pursuing holiness through marriage, what comes to your mind? What does that look like in your own life?
Well, as I was listening to you, first thing that jumps out, the word happiness in our culture today gets used a lot that's an ultimate goal
Mm,
in a lot of things, not just marriage, but happiness is a temporary feeling and it comes and goes. So holiness though is so again, I think we got to be careful there. Some people take the word holiness, being, well, religious or,
yeah,
spiritual. No, you're really missing the point of what
yeah.
holiness really is. But holiness is defined the right way and looked at the right way is a ongoing, long-term, eternal state.
Mm, mm-hmm,
And happiness is just a temporary feeling that comes and goes. So I think that's one of the first things we got to kind of understand there. But I
mm-hmm.
always think about when you're talking about happiness and holiness and the objective in a marriage and all that, I think about something that somebody shared with me, Melinda and I, many, many years ago. And then now when we get the opportunity, Melinda and I do to counsel young couples before they get married now. And we've had that blessing and privilege to be able to do that. And, one of the first things we kind of walk through with them is, and I don't know who came up with it, but this particular person shared it with me. I don't think it was his original idea, but it was a triangle. So if you took a triangle and down here on the bottom 2 points, one of those was the male and one of them was the female, the husband, the wife, whatever. And then up here at the top, at the peak of the triangle, is is God,
Mm-hmm.
holiness, whatever you want to call it. And this guy, he shared that one of the things that happens when we're focusing on happiness and feelings and all that is we're always looking across at each other and instead of looking up all the time
Mm,
to him. And so, it's very easy to be critical and go, well, I'm not happy because of you.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You're not doing what you should be doing. And, I've heard it applied in like a person's personal walk with the Lord. Let's
Mm-hmm.
say spending time with the Lord on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
You'll have a wife going, well, I do it every day,
Mm-hmm.
but I can't get him to do anything, and it's looking across. Well, this guy shared that no, we should always be looking up and worrying about our relationship personally with him. And, if both of us start to do that, you're going to meet up here and it's three, it's that core to bind the three together as one.
Mhm.
But the problem is we look across all the time because we think it's about happiness. But
Mhm.
holiness is if you're looking up all the time. And I've asked wives and even husbands that want to complain about those kind of things. I'm like, well, so let me ask you: are you praying, looking up every day, and praying that the Lord will change your husband's heart, where he will be looking up all the time and not looking across at you? Are you praying? Well, no. Well, that's what you need to do. And the Lord's the only one that can make that happen.
Mhm.
And so you can find temporary happiness and all that looking across at each other, but that holiness and what he really wants for you, where you're one with him, three in one, like the Trinity is looking up. So that's kind of what I think about when somebody talks about the different happiness and holiness, the goal in our marriage and all that. I think about that triangle, and it's been interesting that as Melinda and I have applied that in our life, it changed our marriage. Well, what happened there? Our marriage didn't change. We changed and went from trying to pursue happiness to pursuing holiness. And then that changed our marriage and the ripple effect of that. So I just think that's a great visual. And I always
Mhm.
share that with couples. And, a lot of them will go, yeah, I'm really guilty of looking at him or her all the time and what she's
Yeah.
not doing or what she is doing. No, you need to be
Mhm.
looking up.
Yeah.
That's the holiness aspect. Looking
Yeah.
across is the temporary deal, the happiness and the not happy or whatever. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that example.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think a couple of things to be said. First of all, we want to acknowledge that the scriptures do give a couple of grounds for divorce.
Yep.
And so if someone's watching and has been divorced, then there is a very good chance that you are in a situation covered by that. And that is adultery. I mean, that's not just a physical affair. I mean, that's a pretty wide ranging topic. I think
No
we could
doubt.
maybe
No doubt.
even, we have done some podcasts on that. We
Right.
could do another one.
Right.
There's that one, and then there's also abandonment, I think, is a grounds for divorce, and so there are some biblical grounds for divorce. There's the another side of that too, is if you have been divorced, that divorce is not the unforgivable sin, and so, we wanna be careful here not to come down so heavy that somebody just
Sure.
thinks they're not a Christian or gives up hope or that they can't
If
be a Christian
they're a
because of that.
failure or
Yeah,
whatever. Yeah.
exactly.
Well,
Yeah.
it's one of the things it's one of the things we teach in the man journey with the second truth,
Mhm,
you know, where learn to live by the life of another. One of the problems out there today with of course we're going to talk about men, um, is men that have been divorced for whatever reasons. Another one we didn't really mention there is, and I think it kind of falls into one of those two uh, grounds for divorce is obviously abuse.
mhm,
Um, you don't need to be staying in that kind of relationship physically,
mhm.
mentally, abuse. I mean, abuse after abuse. But is the number of men that I've encountered that say, "Well, Tim, man, yeah, I'm involved with my church and I go to church and all, but I can't disciple another young man or other men because I've been divorced. So I failed to love my wife as Christ loved the church. So I'm a failure at that." Well, again, back to what we're trying to teach in the man journey is that the definition of a biblical man and who you are in God's eyes can't be based on what you do or what you've failed at or whatever. So that's why we think the three truths are so important is that if you know those truths, you can still fail and you're still a biblical man who unfortunately you got a divorce, unfortunately. And so, but you're still who God says you are. You know your identity. You know how to live by the life of another, and you understand how to view life from God's perspective. And those truths do impact what you do. But the enemy the enemy takes failure and then obviously success too. But he takes failure really good and wears us out with it. And so again, I think that's one of the reasons the answer we've been giving to what is a biblical man, where it's based on performance. You got to love your wife as Christ loved the church. Well, stats show that 50% of the people in church today are divorced. The divorce rate's the same inside the church as it is outside the church. but that's not what makes a guy a biblical man, him being successful or failing at his marriage. And so I think that's another thing we've got to understand. So if you're listening and you're one of those guys, you are not what's happened. Um, you are who he says you are, and that doesn't change in his eyes just because you got a divorce. You can still be a disciple maker. You can still be an influencer. You can still be his man that he created to make a difference. I mean, I tell guys all the time, yeah, you may have been divorced, but let me ask you this. Have you ever had an affair with somebody, got them pregnant, and then plotted to get their husband killed? Well, no. Well, that was David. David did that. So, you know, I think you getting a divorce doesn't eliminate you from being used by God. But again, the enemy's really convinced us of that. So,
Yeah, yeah,
so yeah,
absolutely.
if you're one of those guys, don't, don't buy that lie.
Yeah, it's a good word. The other thing too to kind of clarify on is when we say godliness or holiness, we're thinking about things like the fruit of the spirit, love, joy, peace,
Yeah.
patience, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and
It
self-control.
doesn't mean you read, 6 chapters of Leviticus every day and
Yeah,
you try to keep the 10 commandments. You hope you don't, you go and donate your time every day to something. It's not
yeah,
all, that's not what we're talking about.
yeah, or
No.
that you have an uppity attitude because
Yeah.
you're at
Yeah.
church every time the
Yeah.
doors are
Oh, yeah.
open,
Oh,
that
yeah.
sort
I
of
mean, well,
thing.
look at me.
Yep,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Here, now y'all look what I'm dropping in the offering plate. Make
Right.
sure you see what I'm doing here. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So some good places to go. Galatians chapter 5, one of Paul's letters, is where I just pulled that list. It's called the fruit of the spirit, Galatians chapter 5. And then another place that Paul wrote in First Corinthians chapter 13, that's commonly called the love chapter. And
Yeah.
I think you can
Used at
read
most
the
weddings. Yeah.
yeah, yep, absolutely. And that's we mean when we say God is working through your marriage. He's using your marriage as one way. There are many ways in the life of a man, but that's one way, and maybe a primary way that he is at work to shape you, to make you into a man who looks more like Jesus. And so we want to lean into that.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, marriage is a picture of our relationship with Jesus. I mean,
Mhm.
that's a if you want to just hand pick an illustration of what it looks like to have a relationship with Jesus, it's marriage. I mean,
Mhm.
that's what he did, and he created it for a lot of reasons, and it is awesome. Um, doesn't mean you can't fail at. I tell young guys all the time. I'll say, I've done lots of jobs in my life, but the hardest job I've ever had in my life is being married. And so and when I say that, I don't want it to sound like it's some kind of drudgery work or
Mhm.
whatever. But the reason it's the hardest job I've ever had is that that's the thing Satan wants to destroy in my life more than anything else. And I mean, he's constantly he doesn't take a day off. He doesn't hang a sign on the door saying, I'll be back Monday. It's a holiday weekend, so I'll be back Tuesday. No, he's continually trying to drive a wedge between my wife and I, and so I can't take it for granted every day, my marriage. I have to work at it. I mean, I have to realize that it's what God has given me. It's a blessing. It's a picture of my relationship with him, and he gave me this blessing in my wife for a reason, and I'm to honor that, and so I can't take it for granted. The number of guys I've sat with that have been divorced and said, man, I got to where I just took it for granted, and I quit doing this, and I quit doing
Mhm.
this, I quit,
Mhm.
that's why I tell guys, like me, I've been married date your wife until the Lord calls you home.
Mhm.
I mean,
Mhm.
date her.
Yeah.
Be intentional. When you used to date her, you take her nice places. You'd get dressed up. You try to look a certain way. I don't have to worry about my hair anymore. But you put an effort into it. And the number of guys I'll talk to, oh man, I try to hunt as much as I can, so I don't have to be around the old battle axe. Or
Mhm.
I try to play golf as much as I can. Well, and then a lot of guys will say, hey man, you want to go with us to go do this? I'm like, no, I'm gonna do something with Melinda. What? Well, I married her to spend time with her.
Mhm.
I mean, so why would if I got my choice of hanging out with 6 guys that are going bald like me or go hang out with my wife, I'm gonna go hang out with my wife.
Yeah.
So, again, it's the hardest job I've ever had,
Well,
but it's
let's talk a little bit about that. Yeah. Yeah, let's talk about that. Let's talk about how to lean in during the hard times because
Yeah.
there are. I mean, there are all
Oh,
kinds of,
no doubt.
we go through physical things that affect us. Obviously, a lot of families, not all, but a lot of marriages end up being a family in the sense that there's children, and so there's busyness and there's the ups and downs of raising children, and there could be disagreement in parenting, strategies, things like that. I mean, on and on I could go. You lose a job, and all of a sudden that puts a strain on your marriage because it strains the relationship and the family and all that. So lots of things, and plus there's just us, which we're boneheads and say things and do things that in
Yeah.
hindsight
Yeah.
could have handled that differently.
Yeah.
So how do you lean in during those difficult times?
Well, I'm gonna use two different things here, and I'm not saying they're right. They're what have helped me. I'm not saying I figured it out. I'm not saying I got the greatest marriage in the world.
You're just the
But
only other guy on the podcast. You're the
yeah,
only other guy
so
I can
yeah,
ask.
yeah. But I will say I would put my marriage up against a lot of people's marriages. I feel that confident about it. Don't want to be sound arrogant or cocky, but so two things. One of them I talk a lot about already in different podcasts we've done, and then another thing I just talked about a few minutes ago, and that is the first one is the principle of the cross. I don't care what's going on, problems, this, and that. If you're always thinking of the principle of the cross, which is each person of the Trinity, everything they did was for the benefit of the other in the Trinity. Well, same, I've talked about this numerous times. Same thing in a marriage. When learned how to use that principle of the cross in my marriage, no matter what was going on, we could be arguing about something, we could have tough times going on, but if I always looked at it and said, okay, what is best for her in this situation? It might be for me to shut my mouth. It might be for me to just put my arm around her and not say anything. It might be to tell her what I what she needs to hear. So I mean, we could go a lot of places here. But I think if you frame everything that's going on, it's kind of like throwing a blanket over. So if you throw the blanket of the principle of the cross over everything that's coming at you in your marriage, that'd be one thing. And then the second one is I talked about a while ago, the triangle. If I'm always looking up, no matter what's going on, if that's the my desire every day, that's my passion every day. That's I don't want to use the term my goal, but if I'm looking up at him,
Yeah.
spending time with him every day instead of looking across at the problems, at her, I can always find something wrong with her.
Mm, mm.
I know she can't always find something wrong with me, but I can always find. But so again, it's are you looking across or are you looking up? No matter what's coming at you, lose your job, whatever. I mean, hurt, what health issues, I mean, whatever it may be, kid problems with your kids. What are you looking up? And are you using the principle of the cross? So that's two things for me. Now, there may be a lot of other things. You may have some thoughts there that you would throw out there, but since I am the only other guy on the podcast here with you, those are the two that I can say from experience have been so beneficial to me in my marriage. And my mom and dad will be in September. They'll be married 63 years, and I've actually seen that played out with them too, and that's why they're still together 63 years later.
Yeah.
Hadn't been perfect, I think, and then and Melinda's mom and dad before they both passed, they were married 68 years, and so it is possible to be married to the same person
Yeah.
your entire life,
Yeah.
and but I think you gotta, as I said, you gotta work at it, realize it's a blessing. And for me, using those two, the principle of the cross and always looking up
Yeah.
instead of across, those are the two things I think have helped Melinda and I get to where we're at today.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. We both grew up in kind of rural areas, and I have always struggled wanting to see what's going on out in the field. The cows that are out there, the horses or goats or whatever's out there. And what I find is that while I'm driving, if my eyes are on the pasture, that the car tends to start drifting toward the pasture, right?
Absolutely.
And so
Absolutely.
And so I need to keep my eyes on the highway so that I stay on the highway. I think that's true in life as well. And you said that a moment ago about really that's about our aim. Where is our aim? Our aim is to look upward. And certainly that is to look to Christ and to look to him for how he's working, look to him for his strength through us. I think also, though, it figures into your view of your spouse that if you want to spend your time looking for the things that are, nitpicky about her that you could point out and just think about, or the things even in your relationship that are not the best at the moment, you can find those and you will spend your day dwelling on those in your thoughts. But if you choose to be aware of those things, but make your focus glorifying the Lord,
Yep.
finding strength from him and living through that strength, honoring him through your marriage. And then also the things, all of these things that you're talking about, the strengths, the benefits, the beauty, all of that in your spouse. That just like that car on the winding road, if you start looking toward the field, you're going to drift toward the field. If you start, it just depends on what you're focused on. I think that's a good word for a guy who finds himself attracted to somebody at work. It's probably because he started focusing on her and not focusing on his
Absolutely.
spouse,
Absolutely. Well,
where he could
here's
flip that.
yeah, here's something else I came to realize. Nobody shared this with me. I figured this out myself. So,
Mhm.
which means it probably wasn't real complicated if I figured it out for myself. But so using up and down, looking up and looking across. Well, where does the enemy reside?
Mm. Down,
He reside.
absolutely.
He resides down here. He got cast down.
It's
So
good.
if I'm looking across, that's where he can get in the middle of it and mess with it. Well, God's up, Satan's not.
Yeah.
So if I look up, it's harder for him to get involved in it.
Mm.
But if I'm looking across, well, that's his dominion. That's where he's at. That's where
Yeah.
he's a small G God of the world. I mean,
Yeah.
he's in the middle of that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like she's here, I'm here, and he's in the middle. And so if I look up, I think we can figure that out pretty quick.
Yeah.
So
That's a good word. It makes me think about Psalm 121 where David says, "I'll look to the hills, look to the heavens, look up to where my strength comes from." But then you think about, at the end of Revelation when Satan is cast into the pit. The pit is down,
yeah,
and
yeah.
that's his abode, is looking
And again,
down.
I want to make
That's
it
a good
clear.
word.
I want to make clear you're not. It doesn't mean you're not going to have problems.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, gosh,
Mhm.
I've been married 40 years. I mean, we've had our share of problems. Don't get me
Yeah.
wrong, but
Yeah.
I just think that principle of are you looking across or are you looking up?
Yeah.
And doesn't mean you won't look across some. I have,
Mhm.
but if you remind yourself of that every day, and remember, every day you got to work it to. I don't want that word work to come out wrong because I know we want you to learn to live by His life
Yeah.
that's in you. But again, it's work from rest.
Yeah.
But don't take it for granted. Use those two principles. I think things could be a little different.
Yeah.
That's how my marriage changed. I can tell
Yeah.
you, I mean, because first few years of our marriage, it was awful. And I was a horrible husband. Just ask Melinda. I was a horrible husband. And I can't even, horrible's not even the right word. But finally, those two principles, they changed everything.
Yeah. Very helpful. Well, we hope this has been a help to you. There are resources along these lines available at our platform. They're at reupmen.com. Certainly you can find that there. You can go to reuppodcast.com and find out more about this ministry and the resources we had for you. We'd love for you to share this podcast with friends and subscribe to it yourself at the platform where you listen to podcasts. Know that we want to be a help to you. And so you can find that at reuppodcast.com. Thanks for listening to this episode of the ReUp Men's Podcast with Tim Brown. I'm Brandon Porter.